Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. It is summer, and summer often means traveling. Corey and I put this episode together a year and a half ago maybe, so this is a rebroadcast of an older episode. But we all know that traveling with kids can be one of the most challenging things we experience as families. Corey and I sat down and put together our best travel tips for you and talked about, sort of the best practices from a peaceful parenting perspective about traveling with kids. We also put together a little cheat sheet that you can download so you don't have to take notes during this episode if you're driving or doing laundry or whatever. You can find that cheat sheet at reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/resources. There are also a whole bunch of other free resources on that page. So if you scroll down a bit, you'll find the travel cheat sheet one, and you can just download it, and it'll remind you of all of the big ideas that we talked about during this episode. So let's get back into the episode, and Corey and I are going to share our best travel tips with you. Hey everyone, today I have Corey with me, and we are going to be talking about traveling because I don't know if y'all heard, but the World Health Organization has officially declared the COVID pandemic over. And I know people have slowly been returning to travel, and I think that maybe this summer you families are really going to be visiting family or going to Disney World or whatever it is that you've been waiting to do until the pandemic was over. So Corey and I put together some travel tips for you based on experiences that we've both had and from our experience as coaches and with our community members about the kinds of things that come up for them. So Corey, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
And if y'all don't know Corey is one of my peaceful parenting coaches and a wonderful human being and mom to 2 boys and 8 and 4. Is that how old they are?
So close. 7.5 and 4.5.
Okay. Sorry. I should know that. Big C just seems like he's getting so big that I was thinking he was already 8. Okay. So Corey, I think I've told you this before, but one thing that really shaped my experience of traveling with kids was something that my aunt said to me when my kids were little. And she said, Sarah, a vacation with kids is just another trip. And I just thought that was so great.
Yes, because we think it's going to be a vacation, but it's not.
No, never. Yeah, it's actually more work, I think, going on holiday with kids than it is like staying home.
It's so much work. And I know I was just telling you before we recorded this, I've actually actively avoided airplanes with my children because I was like, I just know that is something that seems really intimidating to me.
Yeah. I mean, and I think my experience was, I was just talking to a client the other day who was flying to China with her son. She's from China and he had never been there and he's 4. And she was so worried about get this, 38-hour door-to-door trip to get from where they live in New York State to China. And she was really worried about it and her kid's really intense. And I said, look, it might be fine. Like really, it might be fine. Like, of course, be prepared for the worst case scenario, but it might be just totally fine. And she just emailed me and said that for 38 hours, he did not have a single meltdown. He didn't complain. He's a really intense kid. She said it was great. She said,
my goodness, that's amazing. It's like he was just, so excited about this new experience. We forget that if a child's having a really interesting experience, they might just be wrapped up in that.
Yeah, totally. She said when they got to China, that was another story. But at least the trip there was really seamless and fine. And she was traveling on her own with him and it still went well. So I think, we want to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario, but also be optimistic that our kids might rise to the challenge and it might be totally fine. And the novelty and the excitement might make it easier for them to be patient on the plane or whatever. So yeah, I think mindset, let's talk first about mindset because I think that is such an important thing. So, steel yourself for that it might be really, really hard be also open to that it might go well. What else do you think is important to think about for mindset and travel with kids?
I think this is such an important time to be the calm.
Mm-hmm.
I have such clear memories of this growing up. I was really, really fortunate to travel a lot with my family. And my dad would be so intense until we were sitting and waiting to get on the airplane, and then he totally relaxed. And I remember just being so stressed out. And then I looked at him, and once he was calm, then I calmed down too. So you really have to have that idea that you are dictating how your child's going to react to this in a certain way. So if you can really just have that be the calm mindset and just keep on regulating your own nervous system, they're watching you and they will
Yeah.
probably reflect that.
Yeah. That's interesting when you say that. I'm reflecting on my own experience with getting out, literally just getting out the door for a trip. That is a time when I am most likely to get dysregulated. Honestly, like in my entire life, like getting ready for trips and like getting everything ready to get out the door. And we live on an island, so there's an extra step of getting on a ferry with all of our stuff and then going to our car and then going to the airport or whatever. But I really like those are the times when I've lost it, which is when I'm like stressed about we're not going to make it on time, we're going to miss the plane or whatever.
I think that's so common. And hearing you say that, I think should make every parent feel better and normalize it because you are the most calm person I've ever met.
Yeah, this funny story. One time we were walking so the island that we live on doesn't have any vehicles. So you have to like get by foot from your house to the ferry docks. And my husband was, I don't know, he was like already gone to work or something. I was traveling with the 3 kids to Florida to visit my dad. And so I had like a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And of course we have like the car seat and the suitcases. And it's about a 5-minute walk from my house to where we have to get on the ferry. And we're walking down the street. And of course I was like, didn't leave extra time. So if we don't get on that ferry, we would literally miss our airplane. So we're walking down the street and my 4-year-old trips and falls and hurts his knee and starts screaming and crying, I can't walk, I can't walk, I can't walk. And of course I needed him to walk because otherwise we couldn't get there, right? So I see these neighbors like about, 100 yards away. And I started shouting, help, oh, help. And I didn't even really know them very well. And they came running and I was like, I need help getting to the ferry. And they actually one of them pushed the stroller, one of them pulled my suitcases and I carried the 4-year-old. But I don't know, that was a stressful moment and a good example of island living.
Oh my goodness. But that just shows you I love normalizing this. It is really stressful just trying to make the trip happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
It is really stressful. So I think it's just being really compassionate with yourself and your children.
And thank goodness they were there. Otherwise I would have missed the boat.
I just can't even imagine what they were thinking.
It's so funny because a couple years ago, I said something to them like, you saved my life that day. They didn't even remember. They were like, oh, that's so funny. We don't even remember that. So, okay. So one thing that I think is also really helpful is setting your expectations about what the trip's going to be like. We talked about this actually has come up quite a bit in our membership of people who are actually on trips and they call into office hours and it's like everything has gone to hell in a handbasket, basically. And so I think when you think it's going to be a vacation and you think everybody's going to have a lot of fun and it's going to be great, man, I hope we're not scaring anyone away from their travel plans here. I just like bird's tweet. But I hope nobody cancels their vacations because we're also going to give you some tips to make it pleasurable. But I think one thing that has come up a lot is to be prepared to not be able to do everything that you want to do and to really adjust your expectations down. And maybe you'll be, pleasantly surprised, but don't schedule too much and actually schedule less than you think you can manage. And also be, kind of prepared to be disappointed that it might not be as relaxing or as fun as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. I was helping to run office hours a couple of weeks ago, and we had 2 different people on the call who were actively on a vacation. And that was exactly what they needed. That reminder was that they were scheduling too many things. And then by the end of the day, the children were just done for and just couldn't really carry on. And the second they were able to, have new expectations of, let's just have one big goal per day, they were able to take the whole stress level down and everyone started enjoying the trip more. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I think that we have to just remember where, traveling with kids is so different from traveling on our own or when we were just with our partner, right? And you could get up in the morning and hit the ground running and then just like fall into your bed at the end of the night when you're just two adults traveling together. And I think also just reminding yourself that kids are such creatures of routine and habits, and that it's really hard for them to be out of their routines and out of their, with their own room and their own toys and their, particular things that they have every day for breakfast.
That's so true. I remember I was one of those kids that really needed to know exactly what was going to happen when we were traveling. And this is something my dad just keeps coming up today. Hey, Dad. He was so great at this, where he would like really come up with a structure the night before and tell me exactly what was happening the next day. And then I could really relax. And he knew that for me, afternoons, I was exhausted. I was great in the morning. So he planned around knowing what my energies were like. My brother seemed to be more go with the flow. I was not. So he made sure that, we got up early because that's when I was going to be awake. And we got most of our stuff in the first half of the day so that everyone could relax for the second half of the day. But just like letting kids know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, really that's another good point, is helping them understand what to expect and adjust their expectations accordingly. Yeah, I think that you brought up a good point there in terms of like planning a reasonable schedule, allowing for that, also allowing for wiggle room if things don't go as planned. And even if you think it like should be fun for kids, really, I think we've already said this a couple times, but I think it's worth repeating. Really like cut out some things. You can always go back to the place if you don't get to see everything, go back in 5 years or 10 years. And I think relatives too, you have to talk to them about this. Like if you're visiting family, the grandparents might have like all these fantastic, wonderful things planned for the grandkids, and maybe helping them understand like, look, we'll have a much nicer trip if we do fewer things. And also reminding them like the kids just want to see you. Like they don't care about going out to see every single show or museum or kids play place or whatever. Like let's focus on time spent together and not just what we're going to do while we're there. Why don't you say something next about expecting meltdowns from changes?
So something that I think is really important for parents to remember is that we want to have the same mindset as we do when kids go to school as when they're traveling. That during the day, they're taking in so much information and it's a really busy environment and lots is happening. So sometimes near the end of the day or in the afternoon, whatever happens, you can expect there might be a meltdown. It's just like that after school meltdown where, when a lot of exciting things are happening, sometimes that can actually be a bit overwhelming. And so I think it's just expect that and be really ready to be that empathetic presence and not worry about what anyone else is thinking. Because when we're traveling, that might not be happening in the comfort of your own home away from everyone else. And that's when my favorite line you've ever told me is, my loyalty lies with my child. That's when you need that mantra to just keep running that through your head, because this meltdown may happen in public. It may happen, out and about while you're having your trip.
Yeah, totally. And like, it's really hard to not worry about what other people think, but it's really important. And do you remember my story about the mom whose kid was having the meltdown on the way out of the park, and he was in the wagon and he's throwing things out left and right, and she's picking them back up and he's screaming, and she sees his dad looking at her from across the park, and she's like, oh, great. I'm being judged. And just then he shouted out, you're doing a great job. So, I think that I'm so happy that he said that, because it totally changed how she felt about that moment, but also going forward in life. Like people might be judging you. Absolutely. 100%. They might be thinking that kid needs some discipline or whatever. Or they might be thinking, oh, I've been there. I remember that. I really feel for this parent. So parenting in public times 100 when you're on vacation, because you're going to be out and about more, right? And also because I think traveling is like one transition after another, way more so than you might get at home. I think that's going to also increase the full backpack and the tensions and stresses that our little ones or even our bigger ones are carrying around, and make it more likely that we're going to have like those meltdowns and tantrums. Okay.
We should probably give some encouragement to our parents as to how we can make some of this more pleasant.
Yes, we should. I think you are right. Okay, so let's talk about some things that will make it more pleasant. We've talked about a lot of the hard things. So let's talk about some things that are going to make it easier. I remember we were talking with Mark in our membership, and he had been on a trip with his family, And somebody suggested planning in alone time or downtime for the grownups. And he just went, oh, that would have made such a difference. So I think that's one thing that would makes traveling easier is if you're somebody that who knows they need some downtime or alone time, talking with your partner if you have one, or your family that you're visiting if you're on your own with the kids, about making sure that you get at least a little bit of that downtime or alone time every day. And also purely like if you are visiting family, scheduling in some just your own immediate family time and making time for special time too. I've heard from parents that that's really helpful, that, when you can at least bring a little bit of your home routine with you and getting that time away from the crowd, away from all of the busyness, both for yourself and for your little, nuclear family. What else do you think helps?
Well, I think it's really important to make sure that we schedule an outdoor time. I love the way that you talked about this at Christmas time, about how it can kind of feel like culture shock for family members when you're visiting them, when you bring your children in, because they can be used to this like more quiet lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you bring, your family in, and it can be kind of overwhelming. So I think making sure that you have time to just take everybody outside and just kind of get all of that energy out, and just even give, the people who are hosting you and some family just a little bit of space, I think is really important. I know whenever I'm traveling, I always find out where the nearest park is. And when in doubt, it's like, God knows the park now, and out we go, and we make sure. So at least once a day, we find the nearest park and just let them have that unstructured playtime that is so important.
Totally. And play is so rejuvenating for kids too. Like the play part, just the unstructured play, and being outside or being in nature. And it gives your family that you're visiting a break. And even, even if you're not visiting family, but you're in a new city or in a new place, how cool to maybe meet kids from another culture, or that could, even if it feels like, oh, we're quote wasting our time at a playground in, Madrid or wherever people are, like how cool to sort of be around the people who live there and, step out of being a tourist a little bit.
It's so true. And just, it's so interesting seeing how people gather in different spaces. So I know it was really amazing when we were at a park recently, and it was all these people were doing Tai Chi at the park. And it's just a lovely experience to, kind of really get into a culture. So it definitely can be an important part of it.
Totally. And I think also, if you are visiting family, remember that if you're visiting your parents, they might want some kid-free time with you. I think that's another thing that would make a trip or vacation. Maybe you could go out to lunch with your parents or something like that, and that might take a little bit of the pressure off as well of the trip, which makes me think of connection. And that's one of the things that we talked about being helpful for making the trip more pleasant. I kind of mentioned special time in passing, but it can be so busy that I think that we have to just, even if you can't do special time, remember those micro moments of connection, because your kids are going to be out of their routine and your attention is going to be pulled elsewhere. So really just trying to keep that. And connection also helps with them with their moods and having their backpack not get as full. So trying to keep connection in the forefront on these trips, I think, is really helpful.
That's such good advice. I remember you saying recently that kids actually experience rushing as like a stress response. And so slowing down and just really looking in their eyes and being together instead of, carrying on with your trip, I think is a really important thing so that you can keep their stress down.
Totally. I love that. Okay, well, let's talk about just like some tips that we actually gathered a lot of these tips from between, the two of us, but also our members and Stony, about, sort of just some little things that people can do. One thing that some members said is pack some food from home. And so that, if you are, of course, within reason, maybe you don't want to bring an entire suitcase full of food from home, but if there are things that your kids love that they're going to miss someplace else, or that are going to be really easy go-tos if somebody's having a hangry attack, bring some food from home. I think that's a good thing to do. I also used to bring some of their favorite like books and toys, just like basically in their carry-on if we were flying. They could bring as many things as they could fit in their carry-on. And then they would also have things to play with when they got there. One thing my daughter loved, we would always bring sensory stuff when we would travel, like her kinetic sand or Play-Doh when they were littler, like bringing those sensory stuff, because that provides lots of entertainment, like hours of entertainment, and also it's a way that they can regulate.
Yes, that's such a good idea. We always make sure that we have coloring materials because that's like, it's just such an easy thing to pack. We recently got those. They're like digital doodle boards that you
Cool.
can draw on, and then you press a button and it clears, because then it's like no mess. It's like this really tiny thing and you can bring it anywhere. So when in doubt, they can draw, which is really helpful. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's this, we're not endorsed by this company, but I love Yodo because it's a really cool, they now have travel Yodo players where the kids are totally in control. It's screen free. You just have cards that you put in and then they can listen to.
So it's an audiobook player.
Yes. It's an audiobook player. And so it's really, really cool. And we just got a travel one to try and survive. We do about, a lot of driving in the summer. And we got one of those jacks that divides it. So each kid can plug in their headphone and they can have the book in the middle and they can both be listening to it. So just like some things that can entertain them, so you're not always having to be the entertainer.
Yeah. When we used to drive, well, we still do. We drive back and forth between Toronto and Vermont. And it's about an 8-hour drive. And I used to drive it a lot by myself with the kids. And my middle son was famous for when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? And I would try to be patient and compassionate because he couldn't really tell time very well. And it's a long drive. But I remember when he discovered Harry Potter on audiobook, we got within an hour of Vermont, 7 hours into an 8-hour drive before he even asked, when are we going to get there? Because he was so engrossed in the audiobook that he did not even notice the driving. And when he finally said, when are we going to get there? And I said, in an hour, he said, what? Like he couldn't believe it because he was used to hearing 7.5 hours, 7 hours and 15 minutes, 7 hours, 6 hours and 45 minutes, But yeah, audiobooks are so fantastic for travel. And honestly, we try not to do screens in cars, even with our grown-up kids. We have banned watching things on family road trips. They're allowed to listen to things, but we don't really like people watching movies. However, if desperate times call for desperate measures, and I think if you need to use movies on the iPad to avoid, while you're in the airplane, or especially airplane. My sister was just flying from Florida to Seattle with her almost 6-year-old daughter. And after the trip, she relayed to me that 3 hours into a 5-hour flight, they took away the iPad from her daughter and meltdowns ensued. And she was screaming on the plane. Hi, Martha. Sorry, it's telling your stories in public here. I don't think you mind. But her daughter was screaming on the plane and hitting them. And her husband turned to my sister and said, what would Sarah do right now? And so they said that to me after the fact. And I said, Sarah would not have taken away the iPad 3 hours into a 5-hour plane trip. Well, so when they flew again recently, I said, don't take away the iPad. Either give it to her later if you don't want her to use it the whole time, or just let her use it the whole time, because that just is a recipe for disaster. So I think screens can be good to lean on when you need to. When you're on that airplane, especially my client going to China, you want to load up that iPad with movies.
That's right. That's right. I wish we'd had video in that moment and people would have seen the smile on my face, because I think that's such a good line. What would Sarah do in this situation? And the answer is always, be more compassionate with yourself and that child, and know that this isn't exactly, quote unquote, real life. This is an intense moment. And it's okay if we pull out some things to just get through this moment. Maybe this is when you save the really great lollipops that they love and that they're going to be eating for an hour straight.
Yeah. And you may have a meltdown after from all that screen. I remember when we went to Seattle for my sister's wedding, my daughter watched movies on the plane the whole time. She was probably 7 and she was drinking Sprite because, the flight attendant's coming around. What am I going to say no to Sprite on the airplane? Anyhow, when we got there, massive meltdown. And I had to remind that night, I had to remind myself, she watched TV for basically 5 hours straight and drank pop. And of course she's going to be melting down right now.
Yeah, she's out of her routine. And that was kind of an unusual experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so let's what are some other things? Oh, I love this. I think you suggested this. Getting takeout if you think kids are going to have a hard time at restaurants. a couple restaurants meals a day can be tough on kids having to sit still or sit at all. So getting takeout and maybe even going to that park or bringing it back to your hotel or even ordering like Uber Eats to your hotel or something could be a really good option.
Yeah, this is a time to be really compassionate with yourself about food. I've talked so much to our membership about, our families has struggled with a lot of eating challenges. And this is not the time. This is not the time to try and, be working on that stuff. This is when we want to make sure we're fueling the family so that you can all handle everything that comes at you. So okay to just, do a bit more takeout or more convenience foods while you're away.
Yeah. And I think just in general, I mean, I know I did this. I let a lot of limits go when we were on holidays. Like, as I just said, limits about screen time and sugar. And, my kids my kids were not disasters if they stayed up late. So they would often stay up late. I know that doesn't work for some families and they really do have to get everyone in bed by 7. But I was very lucky that if they stayed up late, they would sleep late. So we could do that. But I think sometimes you can think about, what limits can I let go of, and thinking through if there would be repercussions that would make it harder. Maybe you don't want to let go of those limits, but being flexible, and kids can get that. They're not going to be like, oh, well, I even expect that this is going to be the same way at home when we get home. You can say, and if they do, you can say, hey, everything's a little bit different when we're on holiday or when we're on vacation. And when we're back at home, we're going to go back to the limits and the guidelines that we have at home.
And I think this is a great time for natural consequences because, it's kind of a fun space to let them experiment with some different things. And I know my one child, he was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to stay up super late. And he's tried this twice when we're out and then felt really, really sick because he really needs his sleep and just, was nauseous and felt terrible. And ever since, even when we're on holiday, he'll be like, nope, having a great time, but I need to go to bed so that I feel great.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, he learned himself from, just like letting him kind of experience and kind of decide for himself what felt good.
Well, thanks, Corey. I think these were all such good tips. I know we sort of zigzagged around a little bit, but hopefully people will be able to get some really helpful strategies and advice from this. I just want to leave everyone with one kind of final thought, and that's about the emotional backpack and backpack emptying. We have talked about how because of all these changes and transitions and being out of routine and relatives and everything, that it's harder on kids, right? And it's harder on us. So I just want us to take a minute and acknowledge that, paying attention to our own emotional backpack. And for anyone who's new to the podcast or new to peaceful parenting, the emotional backpack is a metaphor for our bodies. It was developed by my mentor, Dr. Laura Markham. And basically it's that, anytime we can't process anything in real time, when we're sad or frustrated or angry or whatever, and we can't actually cry about it or talk about it and process it, we hold on to it in our bodies. And that's those stresses and tensions and big feelings can build up and make us feel more volatile or more testy or cranky or whatever. And so a kid with a full backpack or a parent with a full backpack, we really need to consciously empty that backpack. And what it might look like for your child is that they get upset about something really small, or they're just being really difficult or challenging. And even if it's a small thing that they're upset about, just remember to make space for the tears, welcome all those feelings, get them laughing if they haven't gotten to the point of tears yet, because laughter and tears are really the most effective way for us to help our children empty their backpacks, empty those emotional backpacks. And when you get that good laugh or you get that good cry and you've released all those tensions and feelings in the emotional backpack, it's going to make everything else easier.
That's so true. And I think parents, when you're going through this trip, you spend so much time thinking about your kids, and taking time to think about your own backpack will help a lot. The biggest advice I can give anyone is if you can find little pockets where you can just go for like a power walk or a run at some point during the day, because that's another way that you can empty your backpack. And that's just going to make it so much easier for you to handle everything that gets thrown at you throughout your travel.
Totally. Well, thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a wonderful summer, and I hope your travels are amazing. Feel free to tag us in your photos on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll see where you were, and hopefully these travel tips have helped you. And don't forget, you can go to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/resources and find a cheat sheet that's going to list out all of these amazing tips, at least we think they're amazing, for you about traveling with kids. And there you will also find other free resources, including my free How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids course. So check out reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/resources. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.